I'm Scott Ott, and this is Bill Whittle Now. Bill, there's a new Reuters Ipsos poll that says going into the midterm congressional elections, Democrats are angry, more angry than Republicans. Now, Bill, you well know that Republicans have been enraged lately because of a variety of things, everything from the threat of impeachment if the Democrats take over, to the Kavanaugh hearings, to the mob scenes that we've witnessed in some place. But the Democrats are angry as well because they feel like they have had a threat to the woman's right to choose because of the Kavanaugh appointment. They're still angry about the 2016 loss, which they don't feel was a legitimate loss. And frankly, they are seeing their power base be sapped away. I guess I wonder, Bill, is anger the only motivation that gets people to the polls? Because the headline of the Reuters story was basically that Democrats are going to show up to the polls in greater numbers because they're more angry.
Well, it's sad to say that people generally tend to vote more in greater numbers the angrier they are. People, as a general rule, it's been shown, I think, fairly conclusively, that people tend to vote against things more than they tend to vote for things as a general rule. And now, as far as the anger divide, the anger gap. Mr. President, we've got an anger gap, and we'd better close it quickly. All I want to say about that is that Democrats are always angry, Scott. They're always angry about everything. Their entire political philosophy is based on resentment, perceived injustice, and who can shriek the loudest about who the best person is to bring down the American imperial death machine.
But let me just say, Bill, though, that I watch enough, or I listen to enough NPR and read enough of the New York Times and the Washington Post to say that what you just said about Democrats, they would turn around and say about Republicans. The perception on the left is Republicans are always angry.
That's fine. That's fine. And I understand this is how the game works. And I understand this is how perception works. And I'm not so naive to say that they don't see that and that there's not some evidence for them to believe that. But what I am saying is that for the last 2 years, it has been Democratic policy, not Republican Party policy, to have Antifa in the streets, smashing things, burning things, beating people up. That's not only endured by the progressive left, it's encouraged by the progressive left. All of these acts of protesting, they said Donald Trump was not elected legitimately. Well, get over it, he was. In the same way that Obama was elected legitimately twice. So we can have an argument about who's the angriest and stuff, and I'm sure there's plenty of evidence on both sides. But the point I was trying to make is that Democrats are seething, according to this article. But my perception is that they're always seething because politics is the religion, the hobby, the occupation, and the primary motivation of people on the left. That's how they get the world they want, is through politics. We get the world we want through going out on our own and working hard and trying to build a life for ourselves. It's not dependent on telling other people what to do. It's the fundamental difference between the two philosophies. So I think the big point is this. I think Democrats are more angry than they have been before, but they were pretty angry with Donald Trump. It wasn't like Donald Trump was like a Mitt Romney who they could kind of live with. So here's what my analysis of this is. It doesn't really matter to me if the Democratic base is angry, because they seem to me to be always angry. The Republican base to me seems to be always lethargic. That is my analysis of the 10, 12 years I've been looking at politics as politics.
So do you think it's part of your role to make them more angry?
Let me just finish. If Republicans are angry enough to get out and vote, then we will see something like we saw in 2016, where, as I like to say, Donald Trump was down 6 points the night of the election in terms of likely voters, but Donald Trump wasn't elected by likely voters. He was elected by unlikely voters. People who hadn't voted in 20 and 30 years came out and voted for Donald Trump. So there is, I think, whether we can have an argument about the moral virtues of either side and so on, but I think we can agree that given the magnitude of the press megaphone, the anger of the left is broadcast a little more effectively than the anger on the right, and enormously more effectively. So I come back to this argument. It was a great story. from the Civil War. I forget who the two parties were, but there was a Northerner and a Southerner talking about the war, and I think it was just before the war started. And the Northerners said, the Southerners said, well, a Southern man's worth 10, machinists and milksops, and Northerners, pasty-faced mechanics. And the Northerners said, you Southern people are very fiery, you're very hot-blooded, you're very passionate about things. And this passion leads you into acts of indiscretion, which I think you're about to commit a major one. He said, but the people of the North are much less volatile. They're like a giant boiler, and it takes an enormous amount of heat over an enormous period of time to really get that enormous body of cold water boiling. But when it does, it generates more power than you will be able to imagine. And I am taking that as my internal gut feeling about what's going to happen in 2018 elections. That when I say the North now, I'm talking about the silent majority that Nixon called on, the people that don't talk a lot about politics, don't have bumper stickers on their car, people who in I don't know what the actual number in Los Angeles was, Scott, but let's say it was a complete blowout. I don't think it was 75-25. Let's say it was 66-33 for Hillary Clinton. That still means 1 in 3 people in Los Angeles voted for Donald Trump. But if you go out there and listen to conversations, the number will be 0 people who voted for Donald Trump. And this is an indication to me that there are large numbers of people out there. And if they are angry enough to actually get up and vote, then I suspect that it will turn better for us than we thought.
People tell pollsters that they're angry, but they also tell pollsters that they're sick of the partisan anger. And I know on the right, you hear a lot of nostalgia for the days of Ronald Reagan when he spoke of that windswept, God-blessed, shining city on a hill. But as I recall, Bill, that speech was really kind of given on his way out of office. He may have campaigned using terminology like that, but was there really ever a time when the way to campaign for office was to present a positive, gleaming vision of a better future? Or has it always been, we have to scare people out of voting for those terrible people on the other side? We've got to get folks mad.
Well, it's always tempting to gloss over any of the negative things in the past, and it's tempting to look back on those days as, let's just take the post-war 50s and so on, just as an example, as a time of relatively clean, relatively civil political discourse. I don't remember Stevenson and Eisenhower going at it the way that Trump and Hillary did. So the idea that there was a more civil time in America's past, I don't think is just a myth. Although let's not forget that prior to the Civil War and at other times in our history, we've had fights breaking out on the floor of Congress. We had a Senator caned nearly to death because he was an abolitionist, and his seat was held empty for pretty much the duration of the war. He was damn near killed. So I don't want to gloss over the past, but there is a certain absolutely new ruthlessness to this, and this needs to be, I think, explained historically as much as I'm able to do it. The Democratic Party as it used to exist and the Republican Party as it used to exist had different ways of looking at America, but they both had essentially the same vision of America. I'm talking about pre-60s now, pre-late 60s. They both thought that American industry was good. They both thought that American working man was good. And some people would say, well, the Republicans are too pro-business and the Democrats are too pro-labor. But it was a balance in the direction of the same goal, full employment, industrialization, improvement of our cities, and so on. And this philosophy, which is labeled capitalism, a term I never liked. I don't like using terms that are given to me by my political opponents, and it was Karl Marx that invented that term. Capitalism is a term that people use for this system that we have because it makes it sound like you need to be the guy on the Monopoly cards, with the top hat and holding 2 big sacks with dollars on them. You got to have like money bags to play in this capitalist game. That's capitalism, is big fat rich guys with bags of money. So I use the word capitalism as much as anybody else, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a free market economy where you get to make your own decisions and start your own businesses. So this philosophy of capitalism and individual freedom has conquered the world, and it's done it peacefully as a general rule. With the collapse of the Soviet Union, the entire socialist half of the population, the half of the population that looks at things through eyes of envy and resentment, where do they go? Well, they had to go somewhere. They didn't suddenly become converted. Their political philosophy collapsed as a natural result of itself in the early 90s. But where did they go? Well, they've been working at destroying the idea of America for 50, 60 years now, Scott. The progressive agenda is to destroy everything that we understand about America. So it's no longer two parties that are looking to a common American future of prosperity, capitalism, and so on. We're now at a world where one party is representing the values of that American ideal, while the other party is doing everything in their power to destroy them. Now, if you think this is just partisan rant on my part, I would point out that it is the Democrats who are launching this continuous campaign to eliminate the Electoral College. And the Electoral College is put in place for a very good reason, and that is so that the entire country of people is not governed by what happens in New York and Los Angeles. That's how power is spread out among the states. And you hear these left-wingers saying, well, that's ridiculous that Montana gets the same vote as New York. Well, Montana gets the same vote as New York in the Senate. In the House, New York gets infinitely more votes than Montana does. It's not an accident. It's been put together very carefully. I've never seen the like of it in history, and I think it's divinely inspired. But put that aside, I think it's the best form of government that was ever been introduced to the humans on planet Earth. Is it fallible? Yes. Does it make mistakes frequently, continuously? But I think it's the best system that we've ever seen. And this system is anathema to one of the political parties now, and not everybody in the Democratic Party by any means. This is why the walk away movement is I think, a real thing. The Democratic Party is no longer about a different vision on how to get to the same America. It is now a vision of America as something reprehensible and abominable, and something that needs to be utterly destroyed and restructured and apologized for. And I don't think there's any evidence to support that particular position.
Well, whether you're angry about injustice in our government or excited about the prospect of a better future, we hope you'll remain with us through this election season and beyond. The fact that we're here and able to give you these kinds of conversations is entirely due to the members at BillWhittle.com, who pay $9.95 a month for their membership. But what they're really paying for is the privilege of being part of spreading this kind of truth around the globe. We hope you'll join them. For Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members at BillWhittle.com for making this possible.